pleasure to be here, to be part of this amazing collection of people, many of whom have been my teachers, my mentors, my colleagues, my friends, my critics, my supporters. And it's been an amazing couple of days, so thanks, really appreciate that. It was also great to see Carol yesterday. Carol is not my teacher. Carol had just stopped teaching when I started at Penn. But she was brought back, she and Leslie were brought back to do an amazing Carol and Leslie presentation, which was one of the most energizing and yet exhausting lectures I've ever been to in my life. And I remember her distinctly stopping at one moment and saying, look, landscape is simple. Landscape is really like the human body. You've got to shrub up all the openings. For me, it's been, for somebody who wasn't my teacher, it's been one of these lasting things that I can't quite get out of my head. I'm not going to talk projects today. I'm going to talk about projective ecologies. You might have heard a little bit about it, thanks to free advertising from Anne first, and Charles, and of course, what Nina Marie was introducing yesterday. This book project, for me, has been an opportunity to step back from my practice, in fact, to reflect critically a little bit on what we've been doing, both individually as a teacher, as a thinker, but also within the practice. But it's also a project that looks at the various relationships between ecological research and design thinking, both over the last 20, 25 years or so, and also moving forward. And I really started the project with this question that's on the screen: is ecology dead? Or rather, is ecology as an informant to design thinking dead? In some ways, I'd argue we've exhausted ecology's critical potential to continue to inform design and design thinking, in part because the term has been overused and co-opted. Ecology is now so central to design thinking and design practice that it's everywhere. Discussions of adaptive, successional, and self-sustaining systems are prevalent on campuses and across the globe, in design journals, and even in the mainstream press. What was a radical shift in ecological thinking 30 years ago is now taken for granted. Ideas of adaptive systems and successional landscapes are increasingly embedded within design practices. Environmental sustainability is de rigueur. Ecology is hip, and everything now is ecology. So are we done? Does this acceptance, perhaps even uncritical appropriation of ecology and dynamism, signal an end to this set of investigations? Or is there more to do? Certainly more testing of successional ecologies in situ is needed. Few extended large-scale demonstrations exist. And such basic work could help inform or inflect the models and theories we're currently using in ways that we might not expect. More than that, though, how do we critically evaluate where we are and where we're going? How do we reset the gauge, or dive deeper, or, with a fuller and deeper understanding, simply move on? A little context is important here. As you all know, in the last 3 decades or so, the field of ecology has moved from a classical concern with stability, certainty, and order, to more contemporary understandings of dynamic change and of related phenomena of adaptability, resilience, and flexibility. Increasingly, these concepts of ecological thought were adapted as models or metaphors for cultural production broadly, and for the design arts in particular. And they were amplified across a range of design disciplines by prominent theorists and practitioners. In this context, landscape architecture assumed a unique disciplinary and practical space, equally informed by ecological knowledge as an applied science, and as a construct for managing change on the one hand, and in particular within the context of sustainability as a conceptual model of cultural production or design. Yet for many of us, ecology is not simply a project of the natural sciences. Many researchers and theorists and social commentators have used ecology as a broader idea or metaphor for a set of conditions and relationships with political, economic, and social implications, or even redefine the term ecology to include these realms as broader context. Felix Guattari, writing in The Three Ecologies, for instance, argues that ecology is as much bound up in issues of social and economic power, demographies, political struggles, and engagement as it is operating in relationship to environmental forces. Rainer Banham talks of a combination of, quote, geography, climate, economics, demography, mechanics, and culture, made evident only via movement on the city's characteristics, roads, and freeways that constitute four organizational ecologies for metropolitan Los Angeles. Kazis Finalis refers to the, quote, networked ecologies of Los Angeles as a series of codependent systems of environmental mitigation, land use organization, communication, and service delivery. And I do want to be careful here. I want to be broad-minded on the one hand, but I also want to be very, very precise about the ways in which we use this term. Against this backdrop, then, it's useful to take stock of the diversity of contemporary ecological research and theory, embracing Guattari's broader definition of ecology as at once environmental, social, even existential, and speculate on potential paths forward for design practices. Where are ecological thinking and theory now? What do current trajectories of research suggest for future practice? How can advances in ecological research and modeling, in social theory, and in digital visualization inform with greater rigor more robust design thinking and practice? It's really this that constitutes the Projective Ecologies project. The project was born about 4 years ago as a symposium that Charles generously supported at the GSD under the title Critical Ecologies at that time. It's since grown. Nina Marie Lister has come on as a collaborator to that project. And the essay that I'm giving today is really based on the introductory chapters for that project. So why projective? Why ecologies? Plural. The modifier projective, on the screen you see, the book is really organized to reprint a series of seminal essays from the last 20 or 30 years by ecologists and designers. We've commissioned a series of new essays by leading designers, ecologists, and thinkers. And we've also collected a series of drawings that talk about the ways in which designers and ecologists draw and project ideas and project the world. So the modifier projective is both important and suggestive. It recognizes the constructed nature of ecologist models for the physical and dynamic aspects of the natural world. Stuart Pickett commented at the Critical Ecology Symposium that, in fact, all ecologists have to work with are their conceptual models of ecosystems, as only rarely can they test ideas on and in the ecosystem itself. In other words, their models are projective inventions. The term projective thus embraces the creative and speculative ambitions of representation, the drawings and models that scientists, designers, and others use to help illustrate ideas. In many cases, it's through this work of modeling, whether in writing or drawing, that ecological ideas have continued to emerge and are clarified. The second part of the title, Ecologies, is an explicit recognition of a plurality of ecological theories and applied research underpinning contemporary understandings of cultural and natural living systems. It spans a broad spectrum from philosophy and the humanities to the social and biological sciences, landscape ecology, human ecology, urban ecology, applied ecology, evolutionary ecology, restoration ecology, deep ecology, the ecology of place, and the unified theory of ecology are but a few of the specialized areas of ecologically oriented research that have emerged over the past decades and continue to inform our thinking about the various interrelationships between plants, animals, and the physical, biological, cultural, and experiential world in which we live. In this regard, this collective body of work, is a recognition of a growing alignment between these ideas and contemporary theories about the complex, unpredictable, and emergent nature of the world, a world which is increasingly recognized as a hybrid of culture and nature, where old dualisms are being supplanted by transdisciplinary thinking, uneasy synergies, complex networks, and surprising collaborations. Now, as part of the work, we've identified three genealogies that have come to inform the state of the art, if you will. First in the natural sciences, second in the humanities, and third in design itself. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the natural sciences. I'd refer you to works by Nina Marie, by C.S. Halling, by Robert Cook, both of which are included in the volume, and by many others. But I do want to give a very brief overview of four touchstones that mark a steady paradigm shift in ecology as a discipline since the mid-20th century, and start to hint at its influence in design culture. In many ways, the origins of ecosystem ecology began in the mid-1950s with the work of the brothers Eugene Odum and Howard T. Odum, both zoologists by training, who together in 1953 published the first English-language textbook in ecology called The Fundamentals of Ecology. Their work explored the various interrelationships between species, energy, and matter within an ecosystem, and the various inputs and outputs that both shaped ecosystems and had reverberative effects on their wider environments. Yet ecology wasn't truly considered a valid science until the late 60s, which coincided with a rise in modern environmentalism, brought on by growing public concerns over air and water pollution, population growth, resource depletion, and the health risks of persistent chemicals brought to light by Rachel Carson in her 1962 work, Silent Spring. C.S. Halling, working in Western Canada, was also important at this juncture. Halling pioneered the notion of resilience and, critically, its implications for adaptive management practices and planning. His 1970 essay on the new ecology and large-scale resource management seeded new interest in the dynamism of the natural environment among non-scientific audiences, including designers and planners, and suggested new ways of working therein. Richard Foreman's research in the 1970s and 80s is a key example of a new direction in applied ecology. Foreman, working at Harvard's design school, developed new understandings of and new terminologies for ecological systems, which were now described as matrices, webs, and networks, for instance, and which were characterized by adjacencies, overlaps, and juxtapositions. His notational drawings of movements, interrelations, and operations married an assessment of the physical landscape with its performance through time, thereby breaking down traditional conceptions of a static landscape. And Robert E. Cook, his lecture and essay, Do Landscapes Learn? Ecology's New Paradigm in Design and Landscape Architecture from the 1990s, drills deeper on the new paradigm and cites studies by David Foster at Harvard Forest, among others, that demonstrate how disturbance and change were inherent to living systems instead of being aberrations. Talking directly to landscape and design audiences, Cook outlines the possibility of using this new model of ecology as both mechanism and metaphor for design practices in landscape architecture. Now, while scientists were making their preliminary work known through scientific journals and other discipline-specific media, a number of researchers in the humanities set themselves to work exploring what might be the social and cultural implications of this emerging research. These works, intended for audiences from a multiplicity of disciplines, took on this impulse to tie humans to nature and to deal with the implications of what it means to be inextricably linked to and part of this world around us, this thing that had for so long been beyond humans, out there, the other, nature. Daniel Botkin was one of the first science writers to bring new ideas about ecosystem behavior to the humanities and the popular press, to establish a bridge between the natural sciences and the humanities. His seminal 1990 work, Discordant Harmonies, told engaging stories about moose on an island in the Great Lakes, or elephants in Kenya's vast landscape, or old forests in New Jersey. Stories that help to overturn models of ecological stability based on evidence he found on the ground. Botkin also traced a succession of concepts about ecology and environment via the metaphors of divine order, organic comrade, the great machine, concepts that illustrate these ideas' cultural roots while simultaneously exposes their shortcomings in favor of an all-embracing yet situational model of the dynamic biosphere. In this new model, humans are fully enmeshed in the forces and dynamics that influence climate and life on the planet, yet the conditions that we may encounter on the ground are fleeting and momentary, caught up in cycles and dynamics which are ever-changing and somewhat just out of reach. Importantly, Botkin argues that our management practices, planning, policy, governance, and day-to-day activities must adapt themselves to this new scientific understanding of the world, that principles of order, control, and limits will eventually do the very things we want to protect and sustain. Others wondered aloud whether this was all there was, if in Carolyn Merchant's terms, nature was indeed dead. Many authors propose the idea that even if we're physically and biologically tied to the natural world, even if our actions have distinct impacts on and sometimes lasting reverberations within the world around us, there is still something unknowable and uncontrollable that's simply beyond the human capacity to comprehend. Whether this is an animal trait or an idea about the wildness, or the wilderness, this essence was important for these authors to define and maintain as something that exists but is elusive, that occurs and exists regardless of human presence or intervention. Among the most powerful efforts in this line is Robert Pogue Harrison's 1993 work, Forests, Shadow of Civilization, which documents many civilizations' attempts to both negotiate natural forces around them and conceptualize their relationships to the natural world, drawing on the principles of the Italian drawing technique called chiaroscuro, through which a foreground element, a lone tree for example, emerges visually from the background, a forest for instance, via a series of light and dark arcs that are developed in relationship and in physical proximity to one another. Pogue Harrison argues that it is only in dynamic relationship with the physical world that each is made evident. In other words, the apparent contrast between humans and nature can only be delineated by a set of devices that are common to them, an inherent recognition that we can only talk about the natural world or ecology via a set of models that are intrinsically human. Neil Everden's 1992 The Social Creation of Nature is also insightful here. Everden traces societal and philosophical relationships between various world civilizations and the natural world, arguing that the simple act of naming nature was a first step in removing the physical world, as well as its demons and uncontrollable characteristics, from the human world, an act of domestication that allowed humans to both sever and control it. He argues for qualities, as opposed to nameable things, that might describe that which exists beyond human control. Quote, wildness is not ours. Indeed, it is the one thing that can never be ours. It is self-willed, independent, and indifferent to our dictates and judgments. An entity with the quality of wildness is its own, and no others. Everden's entrenchment to set the world, nature, free, in order to say that to simply let nature do its thing could be heard within a scientific context, could only be heard within a scientific context that had recently dismissed stasis and control in favor of dynamism and open-endedness in natural systems. Sanford Quinter extends these speculations in the architectural world in his 2008 essay, Wildness, Prolegomena to a New Urbanism. Here, Quinter references a vicious attack on a jogger in Central Park, the Viet Cong tactics in America's war with Vietnam, and the research of the Santa Fe Institute as examples that somehow deal with entities that are uncontrolled or uncontrollable. Quote, "The wild is the logic of animal societies, packs, flocks, and swarms, of the inmixings and inadvertencies of the natural world, storms, quakes, abundance, extinction, and of complex adaptive systems in general, even those of an entirely artificial kind." Quinter calls for a redefinition of the design project and the broader project of urbanism in ways that exhibit or sustain essential characteristics of messiness, indirectness, openness, and indeterminacy. Quote, "To approximate these ecological forces and structures, to tap, approximate, borrow, and transform morphogenetic processes from all aspects of wild nature, to invent artificial means of creating living artificial environments." Quinter has brought to us specifically architectural readership the same quest that others in the humanities had proposed in the preceding decade, but this time expressed in specifically architectural language. Now, all this clearly had impact on design thinking and practices. I too want to step back and reference Ian, who in some ways seems to be with us in the room the last couple of days. For me, contemporary ideas of ecology and planning can be traced to the work of Ian McHarg in the 60s and 70s, in which his analysis and assessment of natural resources could inform the best places and ways to develop land for social occupation. McHarg's methodology gave quantitative value to resources and systems that had long been ignored in the formulation of development plans, and it was popularized by municipal and regional planners across the US, and eventually in other places around the world. With hindsight, the methodology can easily be criticized for its claims with regard to objectivity, and for its objectification of landscape components as things simply to be mapped and quantified. But, more importantly, McHarg's practice opened up planning thought to the idea of the interconnectedness between cities, suburbs, and the natural world, design with nature. McHarg's position leading one of the world's foremost schools of landscape architecture and the emerging discipline of regional planning at the University of Pennsylvania is significant. He quickly became an authority in the academic world of design and planning, and his ecologically based work, which helped determine environmentally informed development strategies, was widely supported by environmentalists, planners, and the development community, and changed the way the design professions regarded natural systems. But even as McHarg's methodology was taking hold, newer ideas about ecology were emerging and having immediate impact on designers' thinking. Richard Foreman's work, cited earlier, importantly recognized the dynamic, living nature of ecological systems, not just the physical elements McHarg was mapping, but how the material of the physical world supports the movement and exchange of ecological matter, water, seeds, and wildlife. Still, others push these ideas further, emphasizing ecological systems typically in states of change, adapting to subtle or dramatic changes in inputs, resources, and climate. And designers were listening. Richard Haig at the Bloedel Reserve in Washington State built hyper-amplified woodland decay and composition in the moss garden and framed out groundwater fluctuation, a phenomenon that extended far beyond the garden or the reserve, in the beautifully simple and abstract hedge garden. Interestingly, both of these gardens were firmly rooted in landscape traditions, but gave new presence to those forces and dynamics that moved beyond the control of the designer, and whose informants and implications reached to the scales of influence much larger than the space of the particular project. The work of George Hargraves and Hargraves Associates, and of course the work of the so-called earth artists that greatly informed that work, folks like Smithson and Heiser and Terrell and Holt, extended this trajectory of design research. Candlestick Point Park on San Francisco Bay was among the early works of that firm that deliberately engaged open-ended environmental processes, and it did so more explicitly than Haig's work. Here the bay edge of the project was armored where a taut green lawn touched the water, but this plain of grass gave way along its edges to an extension of the rocky intertidal zone of the bay, physically and spatially bringing the waters of the bay and its various offerings of floating logs and condoms and animal skeletons and plastic bottles and waste into the space of the park. While Haig's hedge garden was an inward-focused, carefully framed space with a simple plane of water that would register environmental cycles, Hargrave's Candlestick project radically inverted this relationship, throwing open the space of the public park or garden and subjecting it to the larger forces of the bay. Now, these experiments and speculations were not isolated. Michael van Valkenburg's 1988 ice walls at Radcliffe College examined the freezing, thawing, and visual temporal effects of water in its multiple states. Rem Koolhaas in OMA's proposal for the Parc de la Villette included a forest conceived as a temporal garden that allowed the growth tendencies of two contrasting tree species to play off one another and create ever-changing vegetal and spatial effects. Most significantly, perhaps, the work of Michel Devine and Christine Dalnocchi set out strategies in which growth, succession, and careful editing of newly planted urban or industrial forests could be seen to reintroduce environmental dynamics into sites and projects that had erased, or at least significantly dampened, ecological effects. Devine's work is especially significant in that it does not deny the human hand. These projects are carefully curated over time to allow for both ecological succession and human occupation. In this, Devine has effectively, if implicitly, embraced a dynamic systems perspective founded on the notions of both and, rather than the customary preoccupation with a binary worldview founded on either or interpretations of reality. The shift in ecological thinking and research and its counterparts in process-oriented design experiments open new worlds for critical discourse in design and urbanism. Stan Allen identified the new ecology along with engineering systems as important examples of what he called material practices, which focus not so much on what things look like, but more on what they can do. This was a significant moment. Allen's explicit reference to the work of landscape ecologist Foreman, marrying the operative and performative aspects of dynamic ecologies with emerging design theory, moved the discussion of complex adaptive systems out of the domain of environmentalism and landscape alone and into the center of design discourse and theory. Allen's continuing work, in collaboration with Jim Corner and Nina Marie Lister, in Toronto's Downsview Park competition, imagine the setting up of physical scaffolds that would sponsor the propagation of emergent ecologies, natural systems that would be seeded initially and would evolve with an increasing level of complexity and adaptability over time. The Downsview competition was itself significant in that it required entries to account for long-term timeframes and to make explicit some comfort with irreducible uncertainty in terms of project evolution. And while the OMA scheme won the day, the proposals by both the Corner Allen Lister team and the Bernard Schutte team have resonated within ongoing design discussion and teachings. Since this time, a number of design practices have taken up these ideas, while others have adopted analogs of responsive systems to inform design thinking. Adaptive building systems or elements, fenestration systems that automatically respond to changing light levels, keeping building interiors cooler, are now widespread, promulgated by designers and architects such as Chuck Hoberman, Foster and Partners, and others. Ecological cyborgs, which hybridize infrastructural function and ecological responsiveness by diverting waste resources from industrial operations, are on the drawing tables of cross-disciplinary design practices across the globe, including my own. This is an image from a very large urbanism project in Dallas, a competition that we found out we won yesterday. For a series of landscape and urban fabrics of function, of ecological performance, of social interaction, and to borrow Jim's term, of delight. Longer-term management and curatorial strategies for large-scale open space, infrastructure, and urban projects now allow for feedback loops and multiple possible outcomes. Even the structure of multidisciplinary design teams and academic alliances have been affected. Now, I want to come back to the this idea of the projective, to design thinking and design practices. The work of projection and representation is, of course, very much a creative undertaking. Jim Corner's long made the argument that drawing and representation are more constructive or speculative acts than they are representations of ideas that are already formed. And the ecologist Stuart Pickett, as I mentioned before, acknowledged that the activity common to both ecologists and designers is this projective act of making models of the worlds we engage. So part of the Projective Ecologies project then was to collect and curate archival, prototypical, and contemporary images and drawings that explore the implications of emerging ecological models for design. The drawings are arranged in broad categories derived from definitions of specific ecological characteristics that both reflect and reinterpret central ideas within complex adaptive systems theory. These categories both ground these visual speculations in ecological ideas and also construct new ways of working, new ways of seeing. Some of these will be familiar, others are new. And I'll take you through a few of them. Dynamics, the normal pattern of observed changes to prevailing ecosystem conditions. But operational dynamics and choreographies also extend to design landscapes and entire cities, and they hint at the blurring, overlap, interdependence, and/or full hybridization of environmental and urban systems. The scoring of pedestrian and human movements analytically or projectively. This Larry Halprin, this William White looking at activity in the north front ledge of the Seagram's building. The productive alignments of bird and bee behaviors with building and flood-scale infrastructures. The movement of wastes and resources and pollution and water across large metropolitan harbors. And inventive ways to record and project the movement of individual agents across real and fictional topographies together form an expanded array of ways in which the world is constructed and depicted from a movement, performance, and operational standpoint. Succession, the process by which one ecosystem community is gradually replaced by another. Increasing complexity often brings along with it decreasing levels of control and varying degrees of possibility. Here, plant seeding, growth, and seasonal cycles can be activated in ways that create value for a project in its multiple formats over time. Habitat cultivation and diversification becomes the engine of project evolution and phasing. Linear trajectories of time and process and history expand the issues and inputs considered germane. And ecological, infrastructural, productive sequences are choreographed to suggest multiple possible futures. Emergence, the phenomenon whereby new patterns arise through the collective actions and interactions of many individual entities. Collectivity and multiplicity predominate, whereby multiple internal protocols and external inputs interact and inform the reconceptualization of landscapes and infrastructures at a range of scales. Individual agents play ongoing roles in existing and proposed landscapes and cities. Hydrologic, ecological, and jurisdictional mechanisms intersect and play off one another, often muddying the waters. The life and seasonality of protected metropolitan infrastructures and the crafting of humid and thermal atmospheres are all part of an understanding of the world in an eternal state of becoming. Resilience, the ability of an ecosystem to withstand and absorb the effects of sometimes unpredictable and sudden change. Here, creative instabilities are invoked, and multiple states of being are possible, even within the same space or territory. Piscine occupation of dissimilar ecological space, or horticultural occupations of varying geologic and hydrologic territories. the mapping and projection of fluctuating urban and hydrologic choreographies, the appropriation of four-dimensional modeling techniques that simulate and project reciprocal growth and flow strategies, and the design of places and cities that can have very distinct and very different features, yet still demonstrate their formational principles, are all brought into play. Adaptability, the capacity to adjust to and shape the dynamics that normally occur in any living system. Here, an ongoing set of prompts, interventions, and triggers renew or redirect processes in action. Design has agency and intention in the act of redirecting, but it in no way is fully controllable. The mechanics at work are autonomous, independent. In this way, the designer becomes a producer or curator of effects, of dynamics, and of a whole range of social, environmental, urban conditions. Bee behavior in response to temperature, the careful and interactive staging of construction processes and growth mechanisms, the training and management practices that spur new independent ecologies, the collusion of hydrologic and social agendas, emergent practice models, lifespan and project renewal processes, coordinated maintenance, operations, and administration regimens are all activated in the broader project of design thinking. Recently, new modeling programs and visualization techniques offer one path forward for exploration and experimentation. Flow modeling, scripting, and processing software in particular offer time-based platforms for representing and programming change and evolution. Also, new applied research into the relationship of energy and atmosphere offer other potential paths forward as well. But few designers have yet fully ventured beyond the metaphors and mechanics offered by these 3 decades-old models in such a way to design effectively for adaptation to change, or to incorporate learned feedback into the designs on an ongoing basis, or even to work in transdisciplinary modes of practice that open new apertures for the exploration of new systems, synergies, and wholly collaborative work. Though I will say that we've seen some good examples of all those this weekend. This is the project ahead, to present new frameworks for thinking, new synergies and cross-fertilizations among disciplines, and new ways of designing within a dynamic living world, all the while reinforcing and strengthening our position as landscape architects and urbanists at the center of design thinking and design culture.